I'm going to introduce the first speakers of the afternoon, first speaker, and that's Lene from LAIKA, who's going to talk to you about mental well-being in the workplace, which is a topic I'm really passionate about. So without further ado, if you could welcome Lene onto the stage.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. I think I'll bring you as my wingman for every talk I do from now on, try to create this much good energy. I hope I won't spoil the good atmosphere with too many sad statistics about the mental well-being in the world. But as she said, I'm from LAIKA Space Design. We are a Danish process and workplace design company. And we specifically work with the strategic perspectives of the physical frames. So that means how can we use our space to make organizations and employees thrive as much as possible. So apart from our concrete projects, we also write books about what we do. For example, about how to create space for your brain at work, or recently a book about hybrid working. But just before COVID hit, we were actually working on a book about loneliness. And then COVID hit, and we, like many others, had a lot of other stuff on our mind. But unfortunately, it turned out that the topic wasn't unimportant or not actual anymore. On the contrary, COVID actually triggered a big increase and also put the spotlight on the fact that the global health resources in mental well-being is challenged. And as much as it's very sad and hard for the people it hits, it's also very, very expensive and has a lot of collateral damages on our society. So as much as we're also working with all of the positive consequences that we feel that this workplace transformation has brought with us, we're still focusing on the other side of this lockdown and the transformation. What kind of impact will it actually have to be working more from home and to be even more separated? And what we are very interested in is, can we design our way to more mental well-being? So what I'll be diving into today, we have chosen like 3 topics. Loneliness as one of them. Then there's the generation referred to as Millennials, who are always emerging in the surveys as a generation that is very challenged on their mental well-being. And we have neurodiversity also as a topic that we'll dive into. So I'll try to just create some headlines here about how we see the different groups and have some concrete design solutions. Can we actually change small things to make work-life better for everybody? And at the end, some reflections about activity-based working as a concept on the basis of what I have been talking about before. It's very important for me to say that given that a lot of the other speakers here have done research and have their own material, that I am here as a workplace expert, not a doctor or a researcher. I've read a lot of articles and surveys, and I think it's very important and insightful to put a spotlight on that. But that's one disclaimer that I wanted to make. And the other is that given the short time we have here, it can be quite categoric when we say they about a certain group. But what I really find is, apart unfortunately from me not being born between 80 and 2000, a lot of the boundaries between the different topics that we have here is quite fluid and is more about human beings than it necessarily is about a certain group of people. And to highlight that point, I'll just start by understanding a bit about the room. How many here are actually born between more or less 1980 and 2000? And can call themselves proud millennials? Yeah. And how many here like to have plants and natural daylight at work? Because that's a characteristic of neurodiverse people, and I think that goes for almost everybody. I can raise my hand as well, finally. How many have ever felt lonely or left out at work? So that's also something that we can have in common. And in short, how many here consider themselves a human being? Because we're not made of print plates, we are not robots. So the conditions that we'll be talking about now can go for a lot of the people that we see in our workplaces. So the first topic is the loneliness that we talked about, as I mentioned. And I found this definition of what loneliness is that I really like, because it leaves room also for the individual limits of when your needs are met or not. So loneliness is the pain we feel when our social connection do not meet our needs. And it affects many of us, or maybe all of us, from one time or another. But research, and I found this in a lot of different kinds of research, shows that approximately 1 in 5 people feel lonely on a typical working day. So that's a lot of people that you work side by side with who might feel sad and left out and unconnected. As I said about the millennials, it seems to hit harder for the younger people. Finally, good news for oldies born after 70. But it seems that they are more affected in their mental health by loneliness than anybody else. And the older people are, the lower is the likelihood to feel lonely in the workplace. Or maybe you're not just expressing it or acknowledging it. It's hard to tell which situation it is. But in stats, this is what it says. What I think is a really important point is that actually we are seeing a doubling of meeting after COVID. That's kind of, it was crazy news to me that we're actually having twice as many meetings with an increase in loneliness. So an important point here, I think, is that interaction or just being with somebody doesn't mean that you're not lonely. It's not the same as connection or sense of belonging. These are two different things. I think that's one of the points from many of the other talks also earlier today. But loneliness is such a dangerous thing, actually. It's not only to your mental health, it's also linked to a lot of other things, also physical diseases. It's known to be twice as harmful as obesity, and it actually has the same impact on mortality as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's really crazy that that feeling can have that kind of impact on our life quality. Oh, that was a quick change. The second topic that we have here are the millennials. When you Google millennials or the Gen Y, as they're also called, it can vary a bit from 3 to 5 years when the limits are made. But it's more or less like the late 70s to around 2000. And even in a country like Denmark, which we have continuously won the happiest country in the world competitions, we have a big problem with the mental health as well, and also the young adults, the ones who are most hit by this. And about a year ago, we teamed up with Subi, who is the founder of this Millennial Mental Wellbeing organization, the foundation here. And him being a millennial himself, he wanted to try to understand his generation and understand why are we more hit than others, or it has more impact on us, and what does it actually mean for the future of the workplace. So it's a whole report. I know that his mail address will come, and you're very welcome to reach out to get the report, or you can write me and I'll make the connection. But one of the things is that from 6,500 respondees, 92% said that they had experienced having a mental health condition. So that's a crazy high number, especially when you think that according to Deloitte, in 2025, millennials will constitute 75% of the workforce all in all. So it's a very large group of people. It's a group of people that you will meet in the workplace and that we have to design for also. Supi himself calls them the therapy generation, and he said that it's not because we love to seek counsel, but it's because it's okay to talk about feelings. And it's one of the conclusions in the report actually is to please break the stigma. Talk about how you are feeling at the workplace. Have it embedded in the organizational culture. So millennials, technology tech natives, for good and for bad. I think that it's no news to anybody anymore how hard social media can hit people on their mental well-being, on their self-esteem and their general sense of value in the world. And they, at the same time, crave work-life balance. They really seek to have a good life with more flexibility than the generations before them have had the possibility to have. They expect inclusion. Also in the teams at work, it's something that is kind of interesting to have these rather young people coming out from education or whatever and expecting a seat at the table with management. They expect access to their managers and expect transparency and inclusion in their daily work life. So they are tech natives who care more about more than just collecting a paycheck, and they feel and they talk about what they feel. So that's an interesting group as well. Just to put it a bit in perspective, because now I'm kind of pointing at one group of people, I think that it's also very interesting to remember that we can have up to 5 generations working side by side right now. So, for example, when I just talked about challenging the hierarchical status quo or how organizations used to be, it can be okay for some, but for some generations it might be quite difficult. So that's also some of the things that that should be thought about in the workplace culture, in the design to include everybody. Then we have this rather new play. I think it's such a fantastic thing that people talk more and more about neurodiversity and how to include more people in the organizations and create better frames for everybody. Neurodiversity, it's a term that's used to as an opposition to the neurotypical, which is how most brains work. But it can actually refer to conditions ranging from severe degree of autism to simply having dyslexia. So it's actually just about people who process information in a different way than the neurotypical. As much as 30% in the UK are neurodiverse, so 700,000 people in the UK have a diagnosis of autism. I found that to be a high number. That was a surprise to me. But only 1 in 5 people with autism are employed. So when you have the group, an overview of people with disabilities, here in the UK as an example, they are the least likely of any other group to be in work. What I really think is an interesting quote is this from the Office for National Statistics. 1 in 5 British people are disabled, and while most building regulations focus on physical access for wheelchair users in particular, only 8 of these 14.1 million disabled people actually use a wheelchair, meaning that the needs of the remaining 92% are potentially not being met by the built environment. So that means that we have regulations and we know how to to help and attend to people who are in a wheelchair or who are blind or visually impaired. But these more hidden diagnoses, we don't really have any rules or any way of helping this very, very large group of people to feel welcome and functionable in the workplace, which is extreme in a time where we fight for good talent and different diagnoses of autism often imply characteristics that are really needed in today's work life. So that's what we'll try to put a bit of spotlight on today. How can we actually create an inclusive workplace for all? These are years that are changing for many groups of people and many minorities, and a lot of people are kind of taking a seat at the table, and we are having more and more unigender toilets and prayer rooms and parenting rooms and a lot of things, but we are still missing out on some of the groups left outside. And actually, I saw in an article here it said that with more inclusive design, people don't have to change who they are to fit a space. And it goes, of course, for neurotypical and neurodivergent alike, and young and old, or whatever sexuality or color or whatever you might be. And it's kind of a fun definition because working with what we do and what a lot of you do, I think that sounds an awful lot like activity-based working. One of the things that I've always found most interesting about this concept of activity-based working is the possibility to have choice and control. So I think that from some of the concrete design ideas that I'll give you now, it's still the same concept. You just have to provide options and to have the respectfulness towards other people that regardless of who you are, you should feel welcome and you should find a space that can suit you as a person for your work processes or for your daily mood or whatever it is that it takes to have a good day at work. So, concrete design, things that I found while diving into all of these articles and whatever that I think are interesting because a lot of them are actually just low-hanging fruits and again providing options. Workstations that can feel private. It's interesting how privacy and hiding and whatever we call it has been a topic here today. But to provide workstations that you can also, if you have a special need, to have the same routines over and over again or to individualize where you're working from, you should think about that. Movable furniture, it's a common strategy for people with autism, for example, to rock or to move to calm the sensory system. So to provide furniture where you can actually do that and to have it as something natural in the work environment. I'm sure that it's good for a lot of other people for a lot of other reasons, for back or necks or whatever. But to provide that option and also have furniture that might not have too much textile or whatever, because that can also be a sensory thing. Noise level options, I think that's one of the things also that you should always think about in a good activity-based work environment. But here you might have a group of people who are actually hearing many decibels above what others can hear and other ranges of tones. So to have that possibility of zoning, to have walls, if you have walls, be careful that it's not made in textile that can also give sensory overload. But a lot of biophilia, a lot of natural daylight, hence my question in the beginning. I think that will be good for everybody. So that can be some of the advice. To be sure to have light control and temperature control. Wayfinding, not only for the visually impaired, but also for psychological safety for some of the people who might be joining the workplace. heights of meeting iPads or coat hangers or whatever. I don't know how many of you are designing concrete space where you say, okay, so we have the table here, we have the coat hangers here. I was kind of embarrassed to think that I don't think that it used to be something that we just did automatically to have a coat hanger in a wheelchair height, for example. So to really try to step into the shoes of the potential users can make a lot of difference. And finally, we always like, I think a lot of us like to use colors and lighting and fun lamps or whatever, but be careful with high contrast stripes, geometric patterns, etc. This photo is actually from a project that I've always loved, where we did a meeting center with different kinds of wallpaper in all the meeting rooms. And it was for a large group of young engineers. So I'm a little bit embarrassed about that. But now I'm wiser. And again, it's not that we should never do this, but we should just also provide options and understand that for some people, this is not as fun as it is for me. So these were the kind of the concrete design inputs. There's also the other side, that's, okay, well, how about the strategy? How can we provide that psychological safety, which is important for people to feel welcome and to have that feeling of being included, to be appreciated and to feel safe to express themselves. Raising your hand and asking questions. We all know that that's good for both the social capital, it's also good for innovation, and it's particularly good for the human being who feels safe enough to be able to do that. It's actually about building for connection. It seems like connectivity, connection, and sense of belonging are really the key words in these years. It's interesting to see that it seems like organizations know this, but it doesn't seem that the workers or the employees actually feel like this is being implemented in the workplace strategy. So that's a really interesting thing, and something that could be just, I'm saying, a matter of good communication. So if we say, okay, some advice for how to strategically design, what kind of culture are we aiming for to encourage these internal relationship building activities, remembering the point that it's not because you have a lot of meetings in your calendar that you don't feel lonely or that you feel more connected to people. You need to really try to work on the internal relationship building. I don't know how many of you saw that Gallup had this very interesting survey about half a year ago or something, where they found out how important it is to have one real friend at work. It really connects people to the workplace. So in matter of HR and retention and whatever, it's so important. It's good business, actually. And Microsoft, and amongst others, found that if they reward the people who actually drive these things, then it has a big importance in the eyes of the employees. As always, it needs to have the go from the top management, or to really be a culture that you can believe in. The second thing is to build resilience. We are back to the psychological safety, and if you have enough social capital, you can dare share mistakes, etc., which is so good for the company culture. We had a project last year where a big Danish law company, we moved 750 lawyers from their offices into the open in a new building. That was an interesting change management process. But the really, really good thing about it was that it was based on a clear strategic ambition from the managing partners, that they wanted the peer training to take place in the open because they wanted all the young lawyers to hear how many questions are asked all the time. They wanted to build resilience and trust and transparency in the workplace. And I can't remember who referred to Better Up earlier, but I think that this survey, the benefits of belonging, it just underlines all the things that you can do when you try to build a community of trust and yeah, this sense of belonging. And lastly, I think it was Bertie who said that you should have a clear strategy and then be able to communicate it. And actually, I was thinking that the communication of where we are trying to go and what we're trying to do is such a low-hanging fruit in some way if you're really committed to the strategy that you have in the workplace. But you can also maybe change small things to be able to communicate even more respectfully. What we usually call focus areas, I'm thinking now maybe for some types of employees or some types of projects, we can call them low stimulation areas. Or, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, but fuck off and let me eat my lunch, lady. Maybe we can have an area called let me eat my lunch alone. So, you know, to have, because I think that these are so valid points, and it is feelings and needs that we need to address going forward. So we have a big opportunity actually to do this. So my final reflections and my own key takeaways, at least, is that I think that the concept of activity-based working has the potential to embrace a lot of these recommendations, but there are things that we should continue to consider. For example, that if we have an activity-based project where we have free seating, it's still not necessarily for everybody. We really have to think about that. What types of people are we trying to provide with the best work-life possible? But I wouldn't, on the other hand, say that if you have to do with neurodiverse people, or earlier we talked a lot about the introverts, that it's not for them either. I would say that's a mistake as well. So dive into the projects and the users and try to find out how can we actually give them a good work life. The rethinking of zones, I think that's kind of fun because it's a point that's been up several times today. I don't have the word for it either. You ask for a Norwegian word, and at least in Danish, I'm not sure, but a friend of mine said how to be alone when you are with others and how to be with others when you're alone, and I think it's more or less the same. So this duality is something that we should really take care of. And then a very important point, I think that collaboration is not the same as connection. So the sense of belonging and this deep felt connection that can combat loneliness and anxiety and whatever, that's what we should aim for. So after the roaring 1920s, maybe we have the power of the inclusive 2020s. I think that we might really have the possibility to, in this rethinking that's going on overall in society, we can actually make space for more mental well-being for everybody at work. Thank you.
Thank you. And what a beautiful reminder that diversity and inclusion isn't a tick box. I think I once heard someone say, diversity is being given the job, but inclusion is being made to feel safe to live your best self and do that job as your authentic self. So, you know, it's thank you so much for that. I think we are running over, but we did come back from lunch a little bit over, so I'm going to say we can take a couple of questions.
Hi, I'm Bally Chase from IPWC. I think on one of your very first slides where you were talking about loneliness, and at one point, at least if I read it correctly, it was saying that women were overrepresented in that study in terms of actually showing those high levels and high numbers. My question is, and I think especially when it comes to these type of spaces between men and women, whether or not they're going to be open of sharing whether they actually feel lonely, do you, in terms of insights, actually have that split of what that actually looked like between female versus male, men versus women, and actually sharing the loneliness stat? Because I think it's also thinking about like what the first conversation we had or presentation that Bertie was talking about in terms of how women are not actually taken into consideration within these strategies. I feel like in certain places, the numbers we put in front of people actually sort of overrepresent, or sort of we're trying to share data, but that's sort of misrepresenting certain aspects or certain populations. And I guess I just wanted to hear a bit more in further detail from yourself, if you had, that split basically.
Yeah, and sorry, but can I just ask, what's the question?
The question was more about that loneliness stat that you had at the beginning, and I think you said it was women that were overrepresented. I think it was more about understanding.
I think it was from the numbers from Denmark.
Okay, and so with the numbers from Denmark, I just wanted to ask whether or not is the overrepresentation due to men not actually voicing, or the fact that they actually might be feeling lonely as well. So the data is not fully showcasing a wide spread of what that actually looks like.
Yeah, it would have to be a guess from my part, because as you remember my big disclaimer, I just read into the research. But I think that, I can't remember who talked about it earlier today, that women are just in general more likely to be burned out. We have a lot of extra hours, a lot of extra work to do. And maybe some of the same tendencies that we see with millennials, and the ability to talk about feelings and dive into them could also be a part of this tendency. But I think that normally, and I've read a lot about this over the last few weeks here, I don't think that it's a point that's very often mentioned, that women are more lonely than men. It just seems like it's a general and global topic. But I would think that it is so. At least I could see from the stats in Denmark that it is so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lene.
Thank you.
Final round of applause for Lene.